My name is Sharon Hirsch, and I want to welcome you to the fifth videocast this week, introducing my new book, Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. And tonight we're going to be talking about a subject that is dear to my heart, recovery. How do you find it? What does it look like? And how do you support those who may be struggling with an addiction? During this pandemic, some studies say addiction has soared 70%. And even if you don't drink too much or eat too much or binge watch television too much or order on Amazon too much, I suspect you've been tempted to numb during this season of disorientation. Tonight, I'm joined by recovery life coach Lisa Peretti, and she will have so much to offer us from her own experience, strength, and hope. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd like to start out by reading from my new book a few paragraphs, and then we'll be off and running. At that time, the liquor stores in Colorado were closed on Sundays, and I was desperate for a drink, for an escape from the self in public that acted like I was enough to face the challenges of life, and in private knew I was not. I drove to a local restaurant and sat at the bar ordering drinks until my mind and heart were numb. I stumbled to my car to make the short drive home, and the most terrible thing I could imagine happened. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights of the law. It's a blur what happened next. Questions I couldn't answer, humiliation stronger than all that booze, and handcuffs. I was arrested for driving under the influence. I knew my world would never be the same, and I would have to work even harder to hide this blot from my carefully kept record. You see, my experience pushed me further into the dark corners of my life and fueled my determination to try harder, do better, and keep secret anything that might prove my utter inadequacy. I didn't know then that we don't carry our secrets. They carry us. And so, Lisa, I want to ask you, why do we run to behaviors again and again and again that are self-destructive, that keep us from the thing we were made for most, which is to be known and loved, not for what we do or have done, but for who we are? To feel worthy and like we belong. Addiction is the opposite of all those things. So why do we go there, especially in times of stress like this?
I think it can be lots of different things. The first thing that comes to my mind is a quick fix. For me, my alcoholism was very, it was fun with problems and then problems. And it was fun for a long time. And after it stopped being fun and it became fun with problems, it was so ingrained in me. It was like my brain knew to go there for relief. So it was like once it had its claws stuck in me, that's when I was in trouble and I couldn't get out by myself. I think another thing for some of us can be conditioning. I was raised in a church where in a family where how the outside world sees you is what matters. There was some other trauma stuff that, I don't think I fully developed a very strong sense of self. So for me, somewhere along the way, I picked up negative core beliefs about myself that I didn't even know that I had. And as I look back in hindsight, I was acting out of that place of those deep down negative core beliefs that I held about myself. And in my head, I knew God loved me and people loved me and I had a million friends. But it was this constant state of dis-ease for me.
So one of the things I'm hearing you say that I think many of us have experienced is that sometimes when we don't feel like we belong to begin with, because of social anxiety or dysfunctional families or dysfunctional churches, alcohol initially promises relief. It's always there. The liquor stores are always open. Even during a pandemic, they're open. And it works
until it doesn't, right?
Yes. We both have experienced that.
Yes, we have.
And so how do you know when an addictive behavior, whether it's alcohol, drugs, food, shopping, porn, how do you know when it stops working and it's a problem?
Well, I mean, you know better than anyone as a therapist that denial is a huge part of our illness. And it is petrifying to think about giving up the thing that is like our warm and fuzzy blanket, our comforter, our lover, our friend that will always be there. And so mine was a very long, slow slope until the end when it wasn't, and I was going to lose everything. But I knew it was becoming a problem when it was having more control over me than I had of it. When I was having to control it, when I was lying about it, that was a big signal for me. And
And of course, all
especially
those behaviors, being in control, which of course we're not, but we think we are, lying, hiding, they are disconnectors.
Yes.
So all this week we've been talking about the false sense of belonging, whether it's belonging to a political cause or a group or a certain side or looking respectable. Now tonight we're talking about something that's not so respectable, but quite honestly is pretty common, that we often find kind of that sense of it's going to be okay. I'm okay. You're okay after a few drinks. But that's not really connection, is it?
No, I mean, for me, it just degraded me over time and became more and more disconnected, even though I thought I was connected. I mean, even societally in our commercials, we see like the chill out, the beer, the romance. And so I think as a culture as well, we're very primed to believe that, it's how to have fun, it's how to loosen up, how to have better sex, how to
It's
laugh
so
more.
interesting how our stories are different because for you, alcohol began to be about fun, like you said, until it was fun with problems. For me, it was always something I did by myself. It was, but I think for both of us, whether it's, in a social setting or in the privacy of the walls of your own home, it is about disconnecting, first of all, from yourself. Because there's something you don't like there that you feel like needs to be altered in order to be true, even though it's really false.
It is, and it's so cyclical because the more I drank, the more shame I felt. Then the more I had to drink, and it's funny, at the end of my drinking, at almost a couple weeks before my big bottom, what I call it, I was drinking in my closet out of a brown paper bag alone. And I look back and I was like, I don't know, I was hiding from myself. I was
Yes.
literally in my closet hiding when I was home
Because
alone.
you begin to feel monstrous.
You
And
do.
then you think if someone really knew me,
Mm-hmm.
they would either kind of push back or run away. And so that makes us further retreat into the addiction, which seems like it has these warm, welcoming arms. But as we often say in Alcoholics Anonymous, that addiction is actually doing push ups in the parking lot, getting stronger so it can destroy you.
Yep, it wants to get you alone and it wants to destroy you. Um, For sure, yeah. It's very sneaky. It's very cunning, baffling, and powerful.
It is. So for me, I talk about in my book about taking 30 years to get my 10-year coin sobriety because I had many false starts of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And yet, every one of those steps was necessary for this proud woman to say, I surrender. I'm going to have to sit with a bunch of alcoholics in church basement and learn how to find my true self. What was the way for you to get to the doors of recovery?
Oh my gosh, I love hearing that for you because that is my lived experience as well. And for anyone watching, Sharon was the one that nudged me to go to my first AA meeting when I had 3 babies at home and my husband was traveling and I knew I shouldn't be drinking alone. And anyway, I was reading one of her books in a Bible study and I would actually go to Bible study drunk because that was the only way I felt like I could socialize. And I was very naive back then and I was like, a Christian who drinks too much? What? And it was just like opening the door for me of like, You are not alone. And at that time, I was a youth minister. I would take high school kids on mission trips, and I believed that there was a miracle for everyone else but me. And I just had horrible shame, unbelonging, and negative core beliefs. So that's when I went to my first AA meeting, was probably 15 years ago. And I've been to treatment 3 times. Every time I learned a little more, and the layers were peeled off. And this last time it was like, this is not a Band-Aid. This needs to be a lifetime. And that is when I fully surrendered. And I decided, whether my husband divorces me or I lose my kids, I think of the mustard seed parable. And I was getting so tired, and I had dark thoughts, and I didn't think I had a space to be here anymore. And God showed up for me at that very, very darkest, most black midnight. And it was actually when I was in treatment. It was Christmas time. I had been uninvited to Christmas. My kids wouldn't speak to me. It was the most horrible, debilitating, devastating pain I had ever felt in my soul. And I remember one of the first couple mornings looking outside of the chapel window, and it was cold, barren winter. There was no life. It was freezing, and it just looked stark. It looked how my soul felt. And I'm a master gardener, and so I'm always thinking about cultivation and how in winter everything's hunkering down and storing up. And at that moment, I thought, spring is going to come. Easter's going to come. Resurrection can come. It comes every year, and I need to start believing, as the other people around me believe in me, that it can happen for me too. I'm not unique, and I'm going to have to put in some work and feel some pain. But ultimately, for me, it was the grace of God that showed up for me.
And so what I hear you saying, that it's often when we are feeling that disconnection, like our kids won't speak to us, our families are tired of the lies and the excuses.
So tired.
And we think we're hiding it from everyone, and everybody knows. And yet we are alone. Like you said, I love what you said. Addiction wants to get you alone so it can destroy you. That amazingly, that's where God meets us. But I hope you don't mind me saying this. I remember that December with you. And one of the first things you did is you called someone. So at that time of profound disconnection, you called someone and said, "What do I do?" And that takes so much courage.
And you sent me a Christmas card that said, God came to a lowly stable. And I felt so lowly, but I had to believe that he would come for me. But it took a minute.
I think it does for all of us. I remember the second time I was in treatment. I too have been to treatment 3 times. I'm part of the same club, Lisa. And the second time I was there, I felt so much shame and so alone and mad at everybody because they were mad at me. And I just was beating myself up in a group, and some young woman, probably 25 years old, looked at me and said, "You have needed every drink to get here." And that's the mystery of recovery, because I'm not writing your story or even my own. God knows what we need to get to that moment where we say, okay, I'm going to stop trying to figure this out, to fix it. I surrender. I actually need to say that every day.
Me too.
But I do see the path out is about connection. You called me and probably a few other people. You called a treatment center. You started to talk to people there. God started to talk to you. You started to listen, and you were on the path to recovery.
Do you want to know what else was different? So the way I showed up in my life before was a survival mechanism. I didn't trust other people. I came from an alcoholic home. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And so I didn't know how to speak my truth. Even in counseling, I heard you the other day on your webcast say it's weird how people lie in counseling, but I didn't know anything else. Like, I had a strong manager that had to portray that I was okay, even if I was dying inside. So the third time in treatment, the first 2 times I was like, oh, this is kind of like college, smoking, they're feeding us. The third time I had to come to the end of myself. But I was paying a lot of money every day to be there, a lot of money. And all of a sudden it was like, I'm not going to be best friends with these people. And someone from AA had come in and said, you just vomit all over them. And I knew they could take it. So I finally started practicing telling the truth, thinking, and this was one of my first gifts, thinking that no one would want to talk to me again. And people responded and loved me even more.
I think that's the amazing thing. I think about two men that I know. One highly successful, lives in $1 million house in the suburbs, and drinks till he passes out every night. And another man who lives in a halfway house because he just got his third DUI, and he's been sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation, lost his driver's license. But this is what I love about Alcoholics Anonymous. They can sit by each other. And we're not talking about politics or even religion or the church. We're talking about, like you said, the truth. I've been lonely and afraid and vulnerable and sad about things in my life. And I've tried to medicate them all with alcohol. And I feel like I hate myself.
The shame is horrible.
And the other person can then say, me too. And all of a sudden you realize, like you said, you're not alone. And that's the beginning of recovery.
And they tell you to keep coming back.
Yes.
My other favorite is don't give up till the miracle happens. And the miracle finally happened for me after all those years in the long journey home.
Yeah, I think we're not alone. I see Sarah has written on there that she understands lying in counseling too. As a therapist, I don't understand it. As a client, I do. Because we do want to protect those parts that feel so monstrous. And yet it is welcoming those parts that have been lonely, that have done shameful things, that have reduced us to an alcoholic, a liar, untrustworthy person. And we in turn reduce the people around us to people who get in the way of our drinking, and people who are too judgmental, and people who don't understand how lonely we are. Yeah. That's what addiction does. It reduces us to facts, and facts do not connect people. Hearts do.
Hearts do.
And it's when we can get to those core truths, like you said, that are, I don't feel lovable. I don't feel worthy. I don't feel welcome. I don't feel like I belong. And be with other people who say, I get it. And maybe they're 1 or 2 steps ahead of us. Recovery begins to grow. But I think it's important for families. You and I both have messy families. For families to hear that the miracle generally does not happen overnight for most of us. It is a process. And so how do we hang in there with people who are like you and I, and take 2 steps back and 3 steps forward and then 2 steps back and then tell a lie and then try to protect ourselves, and we're back in addictive behavior.
You know, for me, it just had to get really ugly. It really did. And my husband had times where he probably knew I was drinking, but he just couldn't face it. We had these kids, and I always tear up when I talk about this because the way I show up as a mother sober is so different than the way I do when I'm drinking. When I'm drinking, I have a pain inside of me that needs to be killed, and there's one way to kill it, and it doesn't matter who comes in between me and that drink. They're not going to be honored, most likely. So my part of my bottom was my husband. We've been married for 23 years. He's the love of my life. But, you know, of course, I blamed him for not loving me the way I thought he should. He traveled. He wasn't great at communicating or being emotional, and I felt lonely. So where was my lover? Good old alcohol. But in the end, he said to me, I need to protect these kids from you. I think that's the first time I've said that without crying. But one thing that when I was in treatment, 3rd time's a charm, we did have family support. And that was the first time that I had family support. Before it was like, send mom away, bring her back home better. We don't want to talk about it. So for me, that family piece was necessary, and we needed outside forces to help us because there were so many hurt feelings. And I can say today, rightfully so. I had broken so much trust and lied so much to protect my blanket, my fuzzy blanket. But anyway, one thing I love to share is when we I made my teenage boys do a family program and they were pissed, but it was so mind-blowing for me. They separated the kids from the addicts or alcoholics or the family members and such. And they had each person list, what did it feel like when you were at the bottom of your bottom of your addiction? And I have the picture somewhere on my phone. It says like hopelessness, despair, like pain, fear, like all the yucky yuck. And then they asked the family members the same thing. And I had myself convinced, I had a lot of self-pity too, that I was suffering more than everyone else. And that's why I needed to drink. So they brought everyone back together and put the whiteboards up, and both lists were almost identical.
Wow.
And that was so eye-opening for me to know that, probably my kids were suffering, hardcore, but I didn't think my husband was. And, one of my kids once said to me, you chose alcohol over me, because I had to go away for 3 months and really get a lot of deep counseling and help. And I still didn't know how to respond. Like, when I'm drinking, I go into midbrain, like survival. That's what my brain convinces me that I need to. I can't make good decisions. And so I don't think they could see that I wasn't trying to hurt them. And I wasn't having a party. I was miserable. I was so sad and enslaved and miserable. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of anger. And I think it can be really helpful to there's family coaches now, family recovery coaches. I have some names of some good people, counselors. And sometimes you do need to go to treatment, or you just need some space to let things cool down. And I didn't get to make amends this time to my family with words because no one wanted to hear it. They did not want to hear another sorry. And it was good for me because I had my middle son said to me, Mom, you know what the best apology is? Changed behavior. So I didn't get to talk or use my little manipulative mouth. I had to start showing up differently and make living amends every day. And I still do.
I do too. And I think also I have to remember that the opposite of addiction is connection. So the more people I'm talking to honestly about my story, there's certainly been days in this pandemic where I've thought maybe drinking would be a good idea. And then I remember that it's come with too much of a cost that I can't pay again.
Well, and that's for our makeup. You told me that people early on when I was trying to figure this out, people have different liver processes. We have different enzymes in our brains that are lacking. There's something lacking when we feel like we need to run our lives into the ground to have this substance. And so I do believe it's an illness that is not our fault. And when I started believing that, I could put down a little shame. Someone told me, you're not a moral failure, you have a disease.
And I passionately agree with that. No one would choose the horrors of addiction. It is a prison that you operate your whole life out of. And it's hard to believe that the way to get out of that prison is to say, I want help. I want someone else in my life. And I think sometimes we need those people, those face-to-face people, to then believe that, oh, God was there all along. He was there when I got drunk.
He was.
He was there. In fact, he was in me.
He was in me.
When I hurt my children and hurt my parents and confused my friends. And he bore that hell in the hope that the day would come when I would want him more than I wanted booze. I would want him more than I wanted to work too much. I would want him more than I wanted to buy things on Amazon. I would want him and his welcome and his worthiness instead of the welcome at the bar, which is there, but it does not fill you with worthiness. It fills you with shame.
Yep. And his strength is made perfect in our weakness. And I have to say, there was a 10-year period when I was angry. How dare you let this happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't my plan for my life. I used to beg God to take this. And I just have to now trust his process and know that I did have to come to the end of myself. And I have to say, like, the resurrection now is insane because of that long road of pain.
I was just thinking about this process today and thinking about gardening because I know you're a master gardener.
Mm-hmm.
My father is also a gardener, and I've watched him. I'm not, but I've watched him, break open the soil to bury those seeds, which is kind of like a funeral. And when he breaks open the soil, he's not mad at it, but he has to wound it and bury something there in order for there to be new life. And I think that's part of our process of recovery. We have to acknowledge the wound and be willing maybe for God to even replace some of the things that we thought were so important with his own heart, which is one of love. God is love. That's what the Bible says. He wants to welcome us, make us feel worthy, and then he wants us to turn around and offer it to the people who feel least worthy. And that's why I love being with other addicts, because I feel like we really do get how much we need God and his love. That if my worthiness, my welcome into the kingdom is dependent on me, I've tried that treadmill. And usually I've fallen off and broken a leg and gotten back up and tried it again, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not running anymore because I don't need to run from myself, from others, or from God. That's the freedom of recovery. I don't need to run. We can have this conversation tonight knowing, maybe 25 people will watch it, maybe 800 people will watch it, and it's okay to tell the truth of my life.
It is okay. And the truth will set you free.
It does.
Yeah, I know. I just remember like, oh, if we're going on a trip, how am I going to have enough alcohol? Do I have some pills to help me out too? And we're just so bad at being in pain because we're not used to it. And so it can be tough in the beginning to practice those pain muscles. But I have a lot of bad days now. Have a lot of stress. We're in pandemic. We've all had a hard time.
You have teenagers.
Yes, I have teenagers, and God knows why did I choose to get sober before? No, I'm just kidding. I always laugh about that because I'm like, whoo, I didn't want to deal with that. But as we practice those muscles, they continue to get stronger. And then as we do that, we get to be a conduit to help others. And as we tell our story, we heal and we get to help others in the process. It's very synchronistic.
It really is.
It is, and it's so connecting to be with people who are genuine and can, my yoke is easy. His yoke is easy, but as we share it with other people, we share it with him and lighten our own load.
And he truly is the one who says it and means it. Sharon, come as you are. When I was in treatment the last time, third time's a charm, I hope too, I remember having that self-pity you're talking about and saying to my counselor, why do I have to be a relapsing, alcoholic, middle-aged, vulnerable, fearful woman? And he said, I don't know. Have you asked God that? And I said, no, I've not asked God that. And he said, well, I think maybe you should. And so I started to ask God, why? And some of the answers he gave me is, without addiction, I would not know what it means to be loved, not for what I do, but for who I am. I would not know the unconditional welcome of God, that he puts his arm around me and says, in my worst moments, this is my daughter.
And the way he can restore our lives, no matter how long we've been relapsing or how long we've been drinking or how mad our families are. I could barely pray, but I was so devastated every night when I would lay down in that room at Christmas time. And I didn't muster up this prayer, and I would say, forgive me, heal me, renew me, restore me. And I would say it over and over again until I fell asleep. And I don't think I would ever know the depth and the vast ocean of God's grace without this experience of like ripping apart every relationship of my life, traumatizing my kids, hating myself, and then to have God come back and overwhelm me with grace and now allow me to give back to other people in a genuine way. And I don't know. I know I could just sit here and preach about it, but I can't really articulate
There is mystery in it.
Yeah, and that's
Because you think the first time that you drink too much and do something really embarrassing and wake up feeling terrible the next day, you'd never do that again.
Oh yeah.
And that goes to the disease component of this reality. It is a disease, except for if I drive to the liquor store tonight and buy vodka, that's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know not to do that. And it will start that disease process in me that always ends the same way, in disconnection from myself, from others, and from God. So, Lisa, it sounds like what you're saying and what you say to your clients who you are a recovery life coach for is you have to start out by telling the stark raving truth. Because truth sets us free. Truth is where God abides. We're in God when we tell the truth. And so maybe if you're listening to this program and wondering, do I drink too much? Am I shopping too much? Am I doing anything too much? Because there's not enough of anything in this world to fill that longing that we have for connection. I think just asking that question means you at least need to be asking it of another person and telling the truth about your life. And then maybe as you begin to talk to other people, like it's a process, maybe a counselor, maybe a recovery coach, maybe you find up the courage to walk into those rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that can be so scary, but are really a powerful place of healing. And I remember in my early days, I felt certain that everyone there was judging me, that I was the worst alcoholic. And I remember one woman looked at me and said, Sharon, we expect you to act like an alcoholic because that's what we all are here. And it was another message of you belong. Sometimes it's a club we don't want to belong to, and that can be the resistance to getting on the path of recovery.
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of just unbecoming, and shedding old behaviors that did not suit me. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I think you're right. It's like I tell my friends or clients, like, just practice telling the truth with one person. If you have to call a Colorado crisis line,
I
start
do too.
practicing it one baby step at a time. I'm all about baby steps.
So someone writes on the feed that they have a vision that the church would be more like recovery and be more real. What will it take to move fully into realness in the church? I mean, that's a question that's too big for me.
It's a big one. I stopped going to church when I got sober because I'm just going to put it out there. I love the church at its core. I love the gospel message. I love God. But people get in the way of that. We're fallible, sinful human beings. So I'm sure I was judging myself, but I felt very judged by the women in my Bible study, and I went to a suburban, conservative church, and I felt like I had to dress up to go to church.
Yeah, I think you need to find a different church.
Yeah.
I also think that sometimes, certainly early in my recovery and more recently in my recovery, it is another message from the enemy. You don't really belong in AA because, people there believe that the higher power could be the clock on the wall, which most people who have been in long-term recovery do not believe that. They know that the power greater than themselves is God. I think more people have come to God through recovery, maybe than through any evangelism program in the church. But then I would also feel like I didn't belong in the church because I wasn't one of those good church women that, always filled out the answers on the Bible study fellowship sheet. And so I know that any story that ends in disconnection, the evil one is writing. And that is not to say that you need to be in church, because we can connect to God sitting in our living room, listening to worship music or meditating or reading the Bible or reading a story or watching a movie. God is not limited by time and space. I do think an essential component of recovery is connecting our story to God's story.
Yeah, I think another thing too for a lot of us is, I struggle with not only alcoholism, but trying to find my happiness in people, or some people would call it codependency. When I find the right lover, when I get the right job, it's like this series of waiting for fulfillment. And my psychiatrist looked at me and said, I said something like, well, what if I put the words this way? Then maybe my husband won't leave me. And he looked at me and he said, it's time for you to be the hero of your own story. And that's what I was saying to you the other day with, if we're looking for an excuse, we'll find one.
Yes.
We do need to take responsibility and stop blaming our parents who were traumatized as well. And I always say my alcoholism's not my fault. I think it was genetics, trauma, and environment for me. I know it was. But my healing is my responsibility, and I need to own my story.
Yes. Oh, I don't think that could be said better. And I mean, because I know you, I know that part of your story is a dependence on a power greater than yourself, on God, because as we try to be the hero in our own story, we really do come basically with, a handful of stones to what really is a gunfight with the adversary of addiction. And so we need the God that can pull people out of the fiery furnace, that can shut the lion's mouth, that can
make beauty from ashes is my favorite
yes.
one. When
yes.
we're completely devastated and we have nothing,
yes.
to believe that he can make something beautiful from ashes.
So it is this circle that Jesus actually talked about in the New Testament when he said, let me sum up the Bible. And he didn't sum it up by saying, go to church and look good and then you'll know me. He said, love me, love others, love yourself. Addiction gets in the way of all three of those. And so, and we cannot find our way out by ourselves. Especially
God knows I tried for a long time.
I did too, especially the self that feels monstrous, that we hate, that has lied and even let ourselves down. How many times did I promise myself I'll never do that again? And threw my liquor bottles away. And then before the trash man came in the morning, I was out at the curb pulling those bottles out. Interesting, I didn't pour the liquor out. Pulling those bottles out and drinking straight from the bottle as I crouched down at the curb. Desperate to drink and desperate to stop, but not desperate yet enough to connect with somebody.
I can remember you talking about the woman at the well, and you asked me, are you ready to be made well? And so much of me wanted to, but I wasn't willing to let go yet. I just wasn't there. Nobody could convince me. I couldn't hear enough stories. I just had to have my story, and that means I'm not God, and I'm a passenger.
And so I assume that means for those who love family members who are struggling, it's not our job to convince them, to change them, to rescue them. What is our job?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Have you heard the term codependence?
No, I don't think so.
I heard it at a mental health conference. Instead of calling it codependence, there's a PhD doctor who knows a lot about addiction, and he said we need to help people be empowered from a place of love to get well, not from a place of punishment and shame. But I have to own my truth and my story. Bad consequences are what woke me up. My husband loved me enough to tell me the truth, and he was so hurt and so done that him telling me he was done with me and taking my kids away and leaving me at Christmas time was what brought me to the place of surrender. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a family. Like, couldn't be a worse thing for a suburban housewife. It's in rehab.
And so sometimes loving people enough to tell them the truth, but at the same time, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of really willing their well-being. Now, I know in your story, your husband had your kids' well-being to think about too. In my own story with family members who have struggled profoundly with addiction, I get caught up in the codependence of thinking I'm their salvation, I'm their resource, when I would be better off loving them enough to tell them the truth and trusting that as they do this process that we've had to do, which is to say, help, and get to that point where I'm willing to be humbled and admit I don't know anything. I need to listen and listen long and take my time, because God has written into our hearts that we're worth that. We're worth a bigger story than drinking out of the bottle in your closet or me by the trash cans on the curb. That's a small story. That's not one of belonging, but one of rejection.
Yeah. And that's what happens when we're drinking, is our world becomes so small, and it promises in the beginning it's going to make it convivial and fun and colorful, and then when the switch happens, it just continues to get dark, and we try over and over again to recapture. Yeah, and there were times when my husband was like, what's your like shame, and I don't think we need to be shamed more. We already hate ourselves so much.
I don't think
And
anyone.
like you said, sometimes we just need to get out of our own way and our family members. I have a therapist that helps me with this all the time because I have to stay close to the work, and it's so hard with the people we live. I can separate from clients, but my family's a whole different story.
Amen, sister.
She said, your name is not Lisa Peretti, Savior. And I have to tell myself that 10 times a day. Like, I have to get out of the way.
And remember what we needed. And sometimes letting our family members go through that is the last thing we want for them. But without all this pain, this harrowing journey, this 3 times to treatment for both of us, this failure, this learning, I really can't control this. I need something besides me. I need people besides me. That is ultimately, that's what we want for our family members too. And sometimes they're not going to go there if we're the resource, we're the savior, we're the source of all knowledge. Getting out of the way.
They're too close emotionally. There's too much emotion for them to hear it objectively. They need an outside voice. I mean, I've told my husband, you should go to acupuncture. He will never like. And then a work friend told him, and sure enough, he's doing it, and it's great. So we're just too emotionally attached. And I learned that in treatment too, to separate emotional mind from rational mind. And when we're in the yuck, we're living in the emotion on both sides all the way, and we can't hear each other.
We can't. So
we need help.
I think pointing our family members to, or loved ones toward resources is sometimes the best thing we can do. I know with those closest to me that I long for them to experience freedom, the most important thing I can do is stay in my own recovery.
Because you're a living masterpiece, a tapestry with lots of dark threads and lots of light threads, and the whole thing together collectively make a beautiful tapestry. But
so Tammy asks, do you believe wait till the miracle happens is change with alcohol and a true AA thing, or do you think it is an epiphany during your walk with Christ? I believe the miracle can happen before AA and recovery. We just struggle to regain that in our alcoholism. So what are you talking about when you talk about the miracle?
Maybe she's talking about sobriety or belonging or coming home to ourselves.
I do think the miracle is living in truth with myself, with others, and with God.
I always say God brought me from humiliation when I was drinking to humility. And by humility, I don't feel better than anybody or worse than anyone today. I know that I am a unique masterpiece made by him.
And I believe passionately that we can't find those truths by ourselves when we're in our addiction. And do I believe that God can show up to the individual and there can be this profound moment that's life changing? I know that happens, but I haven't really seen it a lot. I think God intends for us to be face to face, soul to soul. That's why the incarnation of Jesus is so important. God could have reached down from heaven and orchestrated our salvation, but he wanted to demonstrate something by Jesus being with us in really crappy, lowly, small places where he was mistreated, he was rejected. Um, his followers were fearful and they were rejected and they didn't always stand up for him. So he has experienced what we've experienced. And yet he still says, I want you to be with one another. And I guess that really is the message of my book, Belonging, that as we tell the truth about our stories, we come to realize we need others and we need God. And that path is going to look a little different for every person, but there are going to be some commonalities like humility, freedom from shame because you tell the truth, uh, a hope for the future because you do what you say you're going to do. When you're in your addiction, you don't. And a deep, deep longing for people who are struggling that does not come with judgment. It comes with welcome. One of my favorite stories is one of my attempts to get better was at this strange holistic center in Pagosa Springs, Colorado. And I did a
Was the
4-step.
amino acid thing?
Pardon me?
Was it the amino acid infusion?
Yes. So it was amino acid infusions, and then you worked on the 4-step. For those who don't know, you kind of list everything your addiction has brought you to. You tell the truth. And according to the 12 steps, then you need to share that and be honest with yourself, with God, and another person. There's that Trinity of Connection. And I didn't really like my counselor. I didn't want to read the list to him. And so I thought, I'm going to find a church. There were 2 churches in this town. There was a Baptist church and the doors were locked. And there was a Catholic church. And I walked in and I kind of sat in a pew, and pretty soon a man who I guess was the priest came and sat by me and said, is there something I can do to help you? And I said, well, I'm really not Catholic. He said, that's okay. I said, well, I don't know if you know what a 4-step is, but I'm supposed to read the truth about my life to someone. Could you listen? And he said, yeah, that's kind of what I do. And so for about 5 minutes, I read this list and he was completely silent. And then after I finished, we were both silent for about 3 minutes, which is a long time. And I was thinking, I've scared him. This has been too much. He's probably never heard a confession as awful as this. And then with this twinkle in his bright blue eyes, he put his hand on my forehead and he said, you have been judged and you are forgiven. And that's what I long to offer other people, to hear the truth of their life. And no, I'm not the judge. That priest was not the judge. God is the judge, and he enacted his judgment by putting it all on Jesus when he hung on a tree. With knowing every single time I'd sneak to the liquor store, or I'd slip into workaholism, or I'd think buying something might make me feel better. He bore the judgment and said, it's finished. Sharon, come home.
In such unlikely ways than we think.
Such unlikely way with unlikely people. Well, Lisa, as we come to the end of our time tonight, I would love for you to offer what you want to say to someone who may be struggling, someone who may be in recovery, someone who maybe's lapsed during this pandemic, or to a family member who's dealing with the mess that we addicts create?
I guess I would start by saying I've had the sun. Hi, God. No, I'm gonna move my computer up.
This late Colorado sun is bright.
See, the
Yes.
future's so bright. I have to wear shades. Speaking of, I always say that a lot. Like I have to look forward, not back. But it's like if you look in your rear view mirror, you're gonna crash. But I have to look back to like remember the pain to keep me moving forward. So for me, the pain and the shame and the ick is a motivator to keep moving forward and speaking my truth and connecting to people. So for someone who's struggling with alcoholism, you don't need, like, I can't even believe now because I do recover out loud and I don't think everyone needs to. How many people, like 1 in 4 people from high school, people all day long reaching out to me, more than I can keep up with because I'm not God. But for the addicts, ask for help somewhere, somehow. The family members, ask for help. Pray. The other thing my middle son said to me when he could barely look at me in that 3rd rehab right after Christmas, he said, Mom, he was looking over to the side, it doesn't matter how many times you'll fall down. It just matters that you get back up again. And I truly had that belief that I never would, that I was just going to keep destructing because that's what I deserved. But grace showed up. And so keep getting back up. Sometimes in AA rooms, people can make you feel like you're a failure because you realize, but as I've gotten closer, so many more people have a nebular journey. Mine was so nebular in 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's why I needed God. It was not lineal. It was not black and white. Be a seeker, read books. Sharon's book, Bravehearts, was what introduced me into the first step on my long, arduous journey. Yeah, I really think in the first step of this, they were saying AA rooms, we can't recover alone. And some people can't do AA. If you can't, there's so many movements and options and treatment. If you're not a Christian or you have trauma around that, keep trying until you find your thing. There's just the stigma. There's just a lot of good movements. There's online sober groups. There's
recovery life coaches.
Yeah.
And I probably should have had one. I don't think they had them back in the olden days.
That's why I'm a coach, because it was AA or drink. And there's so much in between and so much gray, and meet you where you're at and support you until you can get on recovery. And Sharon, you were that person to me, so thank you. You never gave up on me or stopped loving me.
You've been that person to me. I mean, it is the echo that happens in belonging. It's like, thank you, no, thank you. Oh, you've helped me. No, you've helped me. Your experience encourages me. No, your experience encourages me. And that's the echo that I long to go out in this world, instead of the echo of anger and hate and division and self-pity. But that echo of gratitude, as we know that we really, I mean, it's become a corny saying right now, but we really have to be in this together with one another, and certainly with the God who sees us, loves us, and is continually saving us. I've thought about what I would want to end with, and it actually is quoting from my book again, but it's not quoting from me, it's quoting from my pastor. And so, yes, Peter Hyatt. And I think for those who are listening, no matter what state you're in, I hope these words challenge you as much as they challenge me. When we betray, lust, lie, and retaliate, we can't believe in God. All those things are disconnectors. Addiction is the greatest disconnector of all. So I'm convinced your deepest problem is not the sins you often commit, but what they lead you to believe. I'm convinced your deepest problem is not the cigarettes you smoke or the alcohol you drink in secret. It's not the slander you speak or the gossip you cherish. It's not the pornography you pleasure yourself with. It's not the baby you aborted. It's not that you betrayed your brother, cheated on your bride, lied about the whole thing, and retaliated with murder. Your deepest problem is that somewhere deep down inside you, you believe Jesus the Messiah rose from the dead just to kick your ass.
Mm.
When in fact, he rose from the dead so you would believe all is forgiven. It's finished. And the Father is pleading, come home, come home. I think we practice that resurrection that you were talking about, that you've experienced in recovery, when we are connected to our true self, to one another, and to God. And it gives us a taste of home here on this earth that certainly is not our home.
Beautiful.
So I encourage anyone who doesn't have someone to talk to, find someone. And you can certainly find my information, Lisa's information online. There are AA meetings online. As Lisa said, there are all kinds of support groups right now online because of the pandemic. It's a gift that we could say recovery is everywhere. Addiction's everywhere too.
Mm-hmm.
And it just depends what direction you want to run in. One will be chasing the wind and one will be coming home. So
Yes, feel free to look for me on Instagram. I have a sober feed. There's also a new sober church called Free. It's addicts and people that are marginalized by the mainstream church. And it's very biblical. And I just do so much recovery stuff that I have to have some balance, but it's awesome.
So those are good resources. And I want to thank you, Lisa, for sharing your stories and your honesty and your love for those who struggle with addiction. And thank everyone who has listened. It has been a really wonderful evening. And I hope the rest of your night is good. Thank you.